Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I would like to discuss the latest reporting on how the Tories wasted and continue to waste billions of pounds of the NHS budget because they tried to save a few quid in the short term. And at the heart of this is a fundamental failure of Conservative government thinking. By delaying what has to be done, they actually end up making things much more expensive. And they are supposed to be the party of efficient use of public funds. In reality, the complete opposite. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So this relates to the news that because the Conservatives delayed rebuilding programmes for hospitals, not only do we still have to pay for the new buildings, because the other ones are falling down, but we're having to spend nearly £6 billion extra on emergency repairs to the crumbling buildings that need demolishing. And this is money that shouldn't have been needed at all ever. It's not the money needed to manage the replacement of one building with another. It's money that's only needed because the old buildings were not replaced until they started collapsing of their own accord. And it's not bad luck. Buildings, especially modern buildings, have a bit of a shelf life, but the government knows this. They know what the lifespan is when they're built, which means that the government, which will be charged with replacing them decades into the future, will have plenty of notice. None of the hospital buildings that have been collapsing over the past few years were a surprise. They had all exceeded their expected lifespan and should all have been replaced beforehand. But the way the Conservatives in government think is it's all about spending the absolute minimum in order to keep taxes as low as possible. But their absolute minimum is just what's needed over the next year or so. So take PPE stockpiles, for example. I mentioned this on the stream last night. We didn't have any when the pandemic hit. Why not? The NHS has stockpiles of PPE. What happened? What happened was that the last Prime Minister who replenished them was Gordon Brown. 10 years later, much of them had expired. And we know from reports that Boris Johnson was told this in 2019 as Prime Minister. He was told we need to replenish these stocks again, but we didn't. Why would we pay for something we might never need? That is the Conservative thinking. Because from their point of view, they'll have thought, well, we had these stockpiles with Gordon Brown, so he paid the money for them. We got no benefit because we didn't have an emergency. So, why would I waste money on it now? Then a few months later, we're hit with a massive pandemic and the rest is history. That was the fundamental failure of the Conservative mindset towards public spending right there. Conservative governments do not do contingencies. They spend the bare minimum on what they think they absolutely need to spend it on right now. If the country ever has an emergency, you'd better hope a Labour government was in place when the contingencies needed were assembled. And it's this same thinking which is now costing the NHS billions extra just to keep crumbling buildings from falling down before we're ready to demolish them. We're spending money to repair buildings that we just need to destroy. We're just not quite ready yet because the new building isn't ready. And although the Tories promised this 40 new hospitals, remember, they didn't actually get any of them done. I mean, it was galling enough back in 2019, I said at the time, that Boris Johnson was making a big song and dance about these 40 new hospitals when it wasn't any new hospitals. It was just refurbishment of existing hospitals, including replacing buildings at the end of their life. It's not the stuff of election promises, is it? It's the bare minimum you expect of a government. Replace buildings before they fall down. If you make that one of your big platform policies, sort of suggests you're not planning on doing anything above and beyond. But then they didn't even do that. I mean, if only people had seen the 2019 Conservative offer for what it was. We're going to stop hospital buildings falling down. Great, thanks. We were sort of expecting you to do that anyway. Anything else? Yeah, we're going to crush our trade with Europe. Right, nice one, thanks. And it was particularly weird that even Boris Johnson took no action to actually deliver the replacement buildings. During the last year of the Parliament, with Rishi Sunak in charge, you could see their strategy. It was insanely selfish and deeply unpatriotic, but you could see the strategy. Halt all long-term funding for everything. Let it all fall down and be Labour's problem. Salt the earth to make it as difficult as possible for Labour to do anything, then blame Labour for everything and hope that they fail to build anything back up so we can come back sooner rather than later. The Tories knew they were going to lose at that point, so they given that they're not actually patriots, you could see their thinking. But Boris Johnson reckoned he was going to be Prime Minister for a decade. So he will have known the hospitals were going to fall down while he was leading the government. He would have been told that. He was salting the earth for himself. It's like the fable of the scorpion and the frog, isn't it? It's just their nature. Johnson was no different to the others. Penny pinching in the short term, even when it means massive costs down the line, they just can't help themselves. And don't imagine this is just the latest post-Brexit Tories at work. It was the same under John Major. When Labour came to power in 1997, one of their first jobs was replacing all the collapsing school buildings that the Conservatives 30 years ago had just left to crumble anyway. It's a fundamental thought process of Conservatives in government. They're fixated on an unfortunate and somewhat antagonistic combination of philosophies. That taxes should be low and the private sector is more efficient than the state. It's unfortunate because it means they do two contradictory things. They try to reduce public expenditure, but they try to do it by getting the private sector to manage public services. But this ends up being way more expensive because they want a profit, right? So they still want to lower the public expenditure, even though they've now put in place things that raise it higher. So they start cutting corners. They wait until buildings actually fall down before replacing them. Make them more hazardous for people in the run-up to that unhappy event, and meaning that it costs you more to replace them in the long term. Because that's what's happening with these hospitals. Though the same is applying to schools and other public buildings as well. It would have been cheaper to replace them in good time, because then all you would have had to pay for is the new building and the demolition of the old one. But now the building is more expensive because to catch up, we're having to build a lot in a short space of time. But the construction industry only has so much capacity. We need new hospitals, but we need new schools, we need new houses, we need new power stations and so on. We're not just maintaining infrastructure, we're having to catch up with 14 years of false Tory economy as well. But then there's this extra £5.7 billion to patch buildings up, even though they're buildings we want to demolish as soon as possible. So not only did the decision to delay these new buildings break a clear manifesto promise, not only did it mean surgeries having to be cancelled because the ward above fell through into the operating room, not only does it mean we're making extra demands of the construction industry to not only manage the normal rate of replacing old buildings, but coping with 14 years worth of indolence, but we're spending extra money just to prop up buildings that should have been demolished years ago. And this was not just a decision taken by an unscrupulous government trying to weaken the country as much as possible because they knew they were going to lose. It was the same decision they took when they thought they'd be in power for another decade at least. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.